Welcome to Don't Fear the Weight podcast with your host Vicky Masita, bringing together science and personal experience.
Hi guys, welcome to the next episode of Don't Fear the Weight with me, your tiny titan host, as always, Vicky Masita. And today in the hot seat is big, huge drum roll, please, Brad Schoenfeld. Hello, Brad. How are you?
I'm great, Vicky. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Absolutely. So for people who have been living under a rock in this fitness industry and everything to do with muscle hypertrophy, can you just give us a little bit of a background of yourself?
Sure. I've been a practitioner for many years. I was a practitioner for many years. Still am to some degree. But I own my own personal training facility for many years and worked with a lot of high-level bodybuilders, both pros and high-level, both natural and enhanced athletes, physique athletes.
Yeah.
About 10 years ago, I started teaching. It became a passion of mine. Became a full-time educator at the university level in 2010. I'm currently an assistant professor in exercise science at Lehman College. I run their human performance lab. I do a lot of research. I published over 150 peer-reviewed papers, written books. I do a lot of speaking international. I've been in 30 countries across the globe. My main focus is on educating the public on really the bridging the gap between science and practice. There's, I think, a gap on both ends. We tend to have scientists who are in their ivory tower who just say, research is the be-all, end-all, and then we have your practitioners who look at researchers as white lab coats who've never been in the gym, and really neither of them are the case. And a good practitioner will always blend the two. Will use both science and practice to come up with their programming.
That's it. So you're not a busy man at all then, right?
I try to keep myself somewhat busy.
It keeps you off the streets, doesn't it? I suppose. Fantastic. So, of course, the other thing that people, if you don't know, that Brad does, he specializes in muscle hypertrophy, and he's got an excellent book out, which I will put the link down for you guys to get. And it is a very sciencey read, but something that I would really, really recommend everybody to just get knowledge on, just as a nice base for the science of muscle growth. But that's not what we're going to talk about today, because that is realistically what you're known for, isn't it, Brad?
Right.
So we're just going to look at different things, because it's like going to Brett Contreras and talking to him about how to grow glutes or how to activate glutes. You know, Brett obviously knows a hell of a lot more than glutes. So I want to tap into your other knowledge deposits, as I put it.
Brett's very good.
That's it, right?
Brett's one
exactly.
of my best friends, and he is extremely knowledgeable about many topics. So.
Definitely. And that's exactly what you are as well. But like you were just saying, I don't just want to look at the science. I want to look at the anecdotal evidence and your experiences in the gym and your experience over the years of practice that you've been having. So we were going to talk about science versus anecdotal experience on a number of topics. And the first one we were going to talk about was mind-muscle connection. Mm-hmm. Now, I know that you have done a study on the mind-muscle connection, and you've written an article on it. So can we just maybe go over the outlines of that and whether that was more science-based, which I'm assuming it was?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying that I'm like a right now, because virtually all of my research comes from what I wanted to know when I was a trainer. I would think about all these topics and say, well, why isn't there any scientific research on this? Which there really isn't. We'd like to think that we have so much scientific research, and hypertrophy has kind of always been the bastard child of strength and conditioning research. It's kind of been an afterthought for strength and power adaptations. And when I came in, I started to really, as best I could, to make a dent in that, in all the questions that I wanted answered. And I will say that the other side of the coin, which I think is really important for people to realize, and I think one of the reasons that my research has been so well received, is that the best research comes from the field. That basically the bodybuilders get big for a reason. And it doesn't mean that everything they're saying is true, but it's something that when you hear a lot of bodybuilders continue to say, yeah, this is getting me results, we want to put that to a scientific test to say, all right, let's see in a controlled environment outside of anecdotes. Anecdote is really a first line for a study, for research. Because if you get a lot of anecdotes from people who are knowledgeable and who are getting results or claiming to get results, that's where you start saying, hey, maybe there's something to this, we want to study it. So with that as background, the mind-muscle connection has been something that has been preached since I was a teenager, since I was coming up with the Leader magazines, and it was always taught that by bodybuilders, are often taught that you want to visualize the muscle, you want to think about the muscle, and you want to feel it work throughout the range of motion, and that's how you can maximize muscle growth. And really had never been studied. It was really amazing to me. So there's been a bunch of what are called acute studies where they look at the electromyographic activity. So you're looking at the electrical activity, which is kind of like an EKG of the heart that you get. There's an EKG for the muscles that tells you how active the muscles are. But just because a muscle is active does not mean more or less active, does not necessarily mean it's going to lead to greater growth. So there had been some studies acutely that had shown that you get greater activation of target muscles by thinking about them. We were the first to actually put this to the test. The study was published a couple months ago now in the European Journal of Sports Science, very pleased, very good journal. And what we found, really interesting findings. So I'll give you the short course on what we did. We had two groups of subjects. One, we told them to, every time they do a rep, we'd have a trainer with them throughout every rep of every session. And we'd say, squeeze the muscle, squeeze the muscle. And this was said for every single rep they did. So it was really hammering it home. And for the non-mind muscle connection, we'd say, get the weight up, get the weight up. So really they were just given two completely different cues. Everything else exactly the same. These were untrained subjects. I did that because with trained subjects, I was afraid that they would be thinking, since we can't tell what they're actually thinking, that they'd be hardened into thinking a certain way. We'd have more trouble establishing what's called ecological validity, that they're actually, or internal validity really here, and that they're doing what they were supposed to be doing. So we did a leg extension and a bicep curl, 2 exercises, 8 weeks. At the end of the 8 weeks, the arm portion, so the muscle of the biceps, were double the size, double in growth, but the growth was double for the mind-muscle connection. So the group that was squeezing the muscle, thinking about squeezing, had 12% growth, only 6% growth for the just get the weight up muscle. Interestingly, for the quadriceps, the growth was virtually identical between groups. And what we had, we can't know for sure, but what we surmised was that the group, or that the group that were doing the mind-muscle connection was not able to visualize, to feel the connection as well in their legs. And we actually had asked some of the, we did exit interviews, and some of them had even said that. So they said to me, I wasn't really able to get the connection as well in my lower body. And there's some previous research to support such an outcome, because everything we do is with our hand when we're lifting things, picking up things, obviously. So the legs kind of come along for the ride. Our lower body is mostly for ambulation, for moving and for using as a base of support. But we're more in tune when I'm picking up something. Your mind tends to be more in tune with your upper body than lower body. And what we think, what we at least hypothesize, is that if we use trained subjects, that they are better able to establish a connection because they've been training their legs. Like for me, I get a very easy connection now. I don't think I did as well. It's hard for me to remember. I've been training so many years. But the bottom line is that we did at least partially show, and I think more than partially, that the mind-muscle connection is an important factor in muscle growth. And I think that if, like I said, if we were to use people that were able to get better connections in their legs, then I think you'd see the legs respond better as well.
Definitely, yeah. So we're also talking about thinking about the muscle, but you're actually talking about that excessive contraction as well. Because if that cue is squeeze the muscle, squeeze the muscle, squeeze the muscle, I'm assuming you're not just going to kind of pick it up, squeeze, and then let go. You're going to really want to try and focus on that contraction. Is that right? Is that what they were doing?
That's correct. So the cue is really the cue of a mind-muscle connection. Kind of goes to what you say. It's about keeping tension in in the muscle itself. Now, if you can do that without, you could just do that without thinking about it, I guess that you'd probably get the same results. But really the genesis, at least from the mechanistic aspect, hypothetically, would be that you're keeping constant tension on the muscle and forcing that muscle to do greater work than ancillary aspects, other muscles.
Yeah, and was all volume equated as well between the two body parts as well? Or did you have higher volume on a leg extension?
I did not. We could have. I didn't run those stats. So we did 10. They did the same repetition zone. So it was 8 to 10 reps. So if they were to get more, and it was each set was the failure. So they were all fatiguing within the same repetition range. Whether the just get the weight up group was able to ultimately use heavier weights, I'm not really sure. That would be an interesting thing. I guess I could go back and look at that, but we didn't actually run those stats. Okay,
it'd just be interesting to see because in comparison, obviously a quadricep muscle is a lot bigger to a bicep muscle, so it would be harder. I mean, for me, just speaking from my anecdotal experience, I fail a lot on leg extensions because I bloody hate them, to be perfectly honest with you. And they hurt when you squeeze and you really feel the contraction on them. So I can't go as heavy on a leg extension as I would be able to do even on a bicep in comparison to the muscle size. So it would just be interesting to see if the volume and the load was a contributing factor to the mind-muscle connection and whether or not your mind kind of overrode it as such, if you know what I mean by that.
So it is an interesting question. I would actually speculate the opposite. I would speculate, if anything, that the just get the weight up group would have been able to use heavier loads, because when you're thinking about squeezing, generally the time wasn't, we tried, so they both did with 2 seconds down. We controlled their negative, but we just didn't control the positive. It was just get the other group would probably train a little more explosively because they were just getting the weight up. And that would tend to allow you to use somewhat heavier loads. I don't know if that was practically meaningful, but my guess would be that if anything, it would have been a slight advantage in that respect for the just get the weight up group, for the non-muscle group.
Yeah, definitely interesting. And that can also be said for things like, so people who are powerlifters and use that explosive power, for example, they probably have no mind-muscle connection like their bench press, for example. You tell a bodybuilder to kind of really connect into their pectoral muscles when they're doing a bench press, they can probably do it because they can literally flex their pecs. Whereas you tell a powerlifter to do it, all they want to do is get the weight up. So they're going to use that explosive movements and probably use a lot more muscle groups than just their pecs, right?
So not only does the powerlifter not benefit from a mind-muscle connection, it is counterproductive. If your goals, really, they're completely opposing opposite goals, diametrically opposite goals. Whereas a powerlifter doesn't care about building the muscle per se. I guess it can help to some extent with ultimately with getting weight up, but their main goal is just to get weight up. It's to move weight. And if your main goal is to move weight, you want to adopt what's called this external focus. And you don't want to be thinking about the muscle. You want to be thinking externally about blasting that weight through the ceiling, or blasting your head through the ceiling if you're doing a squat. Whereas with a bodybuilder, the ultimate goal is to maximize muscle mass. That the amount of weight that they're lifting is secondary. It's really inconsequential. So, I mean, you look at someone like Kai Green. Kai Green, you look at him doing, worked out in the same gym with him at Body Power. I mean, he's lifting like he's curling 25 pounds, dumbbell, 25-pound dumbbells. Guys, that's 230, 5'6", and 5% body fat. So it's not, he would say, like, if you watch his videos, he even says, it's not about what I can lift. So yeah, so your goals for a power lifter would be, it would be necessary for you to adopt this external focus. Whereas for a bodybuilder, there does seem to be a benefit for this internal focus, this mind-muscle connection.
Wicked, yeah. Really like that. Okay, so moving on from the mind-muscle connection, then let's have a look at. In fact, no. What I'll do is I'll kind of it'd be a nice lead into this one then. So let's have a look at general fatigue and the amount of volume we were obviously talking about as well. When we reach our Our pivotal point of overreaching, should we say. Let's have a think about the science and the anecdotal experience from your side of things about deload weeks. Are you a fan of deload weeks for bodybuilders?
Yeah, I am. I think semi-planned. I think there can and should be some leeway to individual response and to autoregulatory deloads. But I think planning them does, for many people, gives because a lot of people just aren't in tune enough with their bodies to know when they need the deload. So my general rule is somewhere around 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks or so. It depends at what stage you are, how often you're training to failure. So many things that I would take into account. Your deloads can be less frequent if you're not pushing yourself as hard. But when you're starting to increase frequency of training and thereby volume, I start to bring back deloads to generally, as a guideline, 4 weeks. It can vary, but it's very individual. So when I work with someone, I still do consulting. I kind of give a guideline to it and then say, let's see how you do. And if they can be in tune with their body, you want to be somewhat flexible and really just talk to them and say, how you feeling? You think you need a deload? And hopefully they're honest.
Okay. And so that's from your experience and anecdotal experience. What about the science? What does that actually say? Do you have any viewpoints on, say, like max recoverable volume, or the fact that you have an MRV point?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of Mike Israetel. He's a good friend of mine and colleague. I think it's a very interesting hypothesis. If you're asking me about the science, meaning what we know through research, there's been, to the best of my knowledge, 0 studies that have ever looked at deloads and how to apply that. So Mike has extrapolated this, and I think it's a good template to use if you're asking me my view of it. But there is no science to that, so that we really do not have any good guidelines to go by as to how to deload. And part of the issue is that very difficult to get very high level people to participate in studies like this. So I wish I could get a cohort of 25, 30 bodybuilders, high level bodybuilders who can say, yeah, let's put you through a really difficult 12-week training protocol and see where the optimal deloads would take place. If you want to fund that, I'm willing to run that study.
Okay, right. That's one on the Christmas list then. So guys, if there are any, and I take it they all have to be male as well, don't they? Because you can't run anything on females these days.
Well, they don't have to be. Women do present other, of course, obvious issues in terms of their menstrual cycle and other factors that can somewhat hamper those types. There is a confounding element to it, but I'd be happy. It's even harder to find women who are willing to do those types of studies. So.
Tell me about it. And it is infuriating. We had this chat when you were over. Obviously, if people weren't aware, Brad did a TRA seminar and we went out and had some big chats. And one of my major frustrations, as everybody always knows, is that there is not a lot of scientific studies done on women, especially when it comes to muscle growth. And this is one of the major issues. Now, what about then, Brad, still focusing on deload, what about men versus women? From your experience coaching, obviously both sexes, did you find that women could go longer without needing a deload, or was it the other way around?
I have not, to the best of I'm trying to not, I don't really generally look at it in terms of gender. I don't make that, but I cannot think that there are differences. Certainly it's not, if there are, they haven't stood out to me. And I've worked, remember that women, so there are other confounding issues. So women generally, most of the women I've worked with are not female bodybuilders. They're figure competitors and bikini competitors.
Sure.
And their goal is somewhat different. So they're often doing a lot more cardio. It's getting lean, having glutes, especially bikini models. So it is somewhat different. And there's more of a potential for overtraining. So I guess I would do, if I'm trying to think now as to in the people that I've worked with recently, I probably have, my deloads are a little, I think, more frequent with the females just because they're doing more cardio on top of their training, and thus the overall, remember that deloads are basically a recuperation period. You want a recovery period, they're for rejuvenation. So, but ultimately it comes down to the individual too. And I mean, I don't think if you're asking me inherently between men and women, I don't think there's any inherent differences that I would say that would affect that. But when the goals are different and you're doing different training programs, that can, of course, enter into the equation.
Yeah, definitely. And just like you were saying, the more intense kind of training that you're going to be doing, or the more demanding that particular program is, the more often you're going to need to deload in order to recover properly.
Correct.
So I think that study would be massively interesting. And like you said, it's going to be very difficult because I suppose everybody responds in a different manner. And they would all have to have the same kind of variables as well. So you couldn't particularly have an enhanced lifter and natural lifters in the same particular field.
Absolutely.
I mean, have you seen differences for enhanced bodybuilders needing deloads obviously less often, I'm assuming, because they've got the drugs in order to recover better?
Interestingly, not necessarily, because part of the, here's the conundrum, is that usually your enhanced lifter is able to push his volume up higher for more. So they're in the deloads end up kind of similar, because they're pushing harder, they're able to recover more rapidly from day to day. Their protein synthetic rate is always up, and they're able to recover. They need less recovery as far as frequency often goes and volume. So it has not been my experience. So again, these are confounders. I'm trying to think this through, because every time, when you work with someone, you do it on an individual basis. And I don't, in thinking about the people that I've worked with most recently, there's not been great differences between that. There's been differences in their training routines and how they've been trained, because they're able to, like I said, different recovery abilities within the training schedule itself. But that then dictates how your deloads will manifest.
Yeah, definitely. And just out of interest as well, in regards to programming for assisted athletes, would you have them taking less rest days then, because of the simple fact that they can recover on a day-to-day basis better?
Yeah. So generally, I'm able to push, when I'm working with enhanced athletes, they're able to push the envelope more. And yeah, usually their training frequency is higher. Because I use training frequency, I don't like to have marathon sessions where you're doing 2-3 hour training sessions. So I use frequency as a way to bump volume. No matter what, if you're pushing hard within your workout, you start having very long workouts, whatever's coming towards the end, you're going to see decreased results from. You're not going to have the same response. So usually I'm generally pushing frequency to push volume, whereas, and you can't do that to the same extent with a natural athlete for long periods of time. You can do that for longer periods with an enhanced athlete without delving into overtraining. At least that's been my experience.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it completely makes sense as well. So because my brain's going at like 1,000 miles an hour because of everything that you say, I always get loads of questions after you do these talks. Combining both of the subjects that we've literally just spoken about, and with you saying marathon sessions as well, what's your viewpoint on the new kind of hybrid training system known as power building? So we're talking about big, heavy lifts at the beginning of your workout, and then all of your volume. So like almost power lifting style lifts for 2 compounds or 3 compounds at the beginning of your workout. And then the remainder of your workout is made up of all of your volume work and accessory work in bodybuilder fashion. So anywhere like heavy 5s or, 4x6s, for example, on your compounds, and then moving on to your bodybuilder type stuff, which is your 10 to 12, 12 to 15, and then just repping out and using intensity methods like drop sets and rep sets and things. Now, these sessions are going to go on for like 2, maybe 2.5 hours. So what's your viewpoint on that? Because we're kind of missing the mind-muscle connection from the powerlifting side of things, but gaining the strength and the neurological adaptations. But then we've got the bodybuilding mind-muscle connection in the second part, but then we've got a 2.5 hour training session.
Well, first of all, I'd say you don't need to have a 2.5 hour training session. That's just the way some people manage that type of system. Sure. But you certainly can. You disappeared on me. You certainly can have shorter. There's a gazillion different ways to structure. Oh, there's light there now. I know.
I was just thinking, I'm going to go into pure darkness here.
The shadows before, now you come into the light. So I like. So I mean, I've used bottom line is I've used similar programs to that, not within never 2.5 hour, but where you're going to have more of your compound move, more of your heavier sets in compound moves early, and then for instance, if you're doing a leg day, I could have worked with squats for 5s, like I said, 4 sets of 5, leg presses 3 sets of 10, and leg extensions 2 sets of 15, or 3 sets. Again, and those are just kind of numbers that I'm throwing out there. The number of actual sets can vary, but that could be a quad type of workout. I've used daily undulating periodization, which again is kind of the same. So these are all just variations on a theme. You want to generally get some type of heavy. When I say heavy, you don't necessarily have to do singles, but I like to have some strength work in there. And when you talk, so this is actually an interesting point that you brought up with the mind-muscle connection. Doesn't mean that just because the mind-muscle connection works, doesn't mean that every rep of every set has to be mind-muscle connection.
Sure.
What it means is that there's some of your training should, at least the extrapolation that I would give you from the research is that some of your training should include mind-muscle work. It does not mean that your heavy compounds need to do that. You can, perhaps not. These are things that really is more intuitive, and research will never tell you this. And that is why this is a central tenet. And I think if I can leave everyone with one particular thought, it's that research will never tell you what to do. Research provides guidelines, and ultimately it is up to the individual to use their own personal experience in combination with the needs and abilities of the individual to bring out the research and to utilize the research to optimize individual programming and individual results. So with that said, do I think power building is an option? Yes. Is it the be all end all? No. Do you need to do a 2.5 hour power building session? No. So power building, if you're in the sense that I look at it, really it's just an undulating form of periodization where you're somehow managing heavy loads with lighter, moderate, and lighter loads to produce an effect. And whether that's within a session, whether it's spread out over a week, a month, several months, those are all options on the table. And part of that will depend upon what your ultimate goal is, the individual, and other factors.
Yeah, excellent. I love that. All right, so let's move away then from making the muscle nice and big and full, and different ways in which we can do that and recovering from it. Now let's have a look at something that's a hot topic in the media at the moment, especially because the bodybuilding show season has started, especially here in the UK anyway. Dehydration. Now, this is obviously completely the other end of the spectrum, but because it's a hot topic, I thought we might as well have a look at the science and your experience and whether you are a fan of dehydration, which is obviously a questionable thing to say, and how it can affect your overall look as a bodybuilder. So if we cover that basis first, and then we can maybe have a look at dehydration protocols for making weight for powerlifters, I suppose, because they use it quite a lot as a tool, don't they?
Yeah, so two completely different goals there. So a bodybuilder, of course, their goal is to look shredded on game day, if you will, the competition. I've experimented with because I've been a bodybuilder, a natty bodybuilder for many years. I was, so I'm not competing in the well, but when I was, experimented with myself with different strategies for water depletion or not. And also with clients for years. And I've come to not really using holding off water. Now, you don't want to overdo it with water, but having normal water intake right up until the morning of the show is generally what I do, or what I preach. There are problems with water. So the body is just very fickle in terms of how it responds. Some people, when you start to play around with that, you don't know what's going to happen. And to me, I think that the safe bet, I like to play it safe, where you can have good success with holding water. Some people do, and I've had clients that have. I've also had clients that it completely backfired because the electrolytes, there's a yin and a yang with your electrolytes and how body water is pulled into muscles or into the extracellular spaces. And I've had people that have come out looking very puffy as well. And I don't think you can go wrong, really. Well, when I say you will not really screw it up if you just have normal water intake, and then restrict on the day of the show. I generally tell them to just sip water, as needed. You don't want to hydrate up a lot, but you just want to sip it, because by that time the body isn't going to react, and you don't want to add in a lot of water. But up until the evening before, it's basically just consuming regular water, a gallon or so of water for a day. As far as powerlifting, I do not work in that respect with powerlifters. I've worked with some wrestlers actually over time. That to me starts to get into a real dangerous area. The types of depletion that they've used, it's dangerous even, first of all, just from the health perspective, because they do water depletion to real extremes, where saunas, and more so, or if you don't want to talk about the health or just discounting that, the performance aspect. Bodybuilders are, you can pose, basically if you're depleted, you can end up posing through things. With even that's somewhat sketchy. Now with bodybuilders, I'm kind of jumping around here, but the other thing, bodybuilders of course are known to take diuretics, and that can have real issues as well. And which account, of course, with powerlifters. The issue, though, with depleting water, as you're talking about, especially if you're weighing in the morning, that it can really substantially negatively affect performance outcomes. So if you're dehydrated, I mean, you can get dizzy. And anyway, so those are performance issues, and that would be something, again, I don't do a lot. I don't work with powerlifters on their I've worked with powerlifters on getting their lifts up from strength and hypertrophy standpoint, but not for prepping to a competition.
Okay, so but in terms of dehydrating a muscle, then for a bodybuilder, because obviously back in the day, I want to say Arnold Schwarzenegger days and that kind of thing, they were really big fans of dehydration, weren't they? And but again, speaking from like a scientific point of view, if you cut water, your muscle is realistically going to be a little bit flatter. But anecdotally, speaking to a lot of people, they've used dehydration methods and it's worked very well for them. Now, whether or not it's different between natty bodybuilders and enhanced bodybuilders, I'm not particularly sure, because I don't work with a lot of enhanced bodybuilders, if I'm honest. But I mean, what about your particular anecdotal evidence? Have you used dehydration, or known of bodybuilders even back in the day to use dehydration to their, to optimally use it, I suppose?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, so I've used those strategies in working with clients with all sorts of bodybuilders. Sometimes it works very well. Now, just from a logical standpoint, so again, the body's response is going to be very individual, and that's kind of the issue here. And not only is it individual between individuals, but it's individual. Sometimes you can have the same person do the same protocol, and they'll have different responses just based upon how their body is working at a given point. Doesn't mean just because you responded a certain way 3 months ago that necessarily your body, usually it'll be somewhat similar from person to person, but I've seen again where from different shows across the same year where they've responded very differently. When we thought we had it nailed, and then they did the exact same thing and it didn't work out. So and I can't really, mechanistically, I don't know what's going on. You can make certain assumptions or guesstimates. But the issue here that you got to remember too is that when the body is deprived of water, it's going to generally, what is very important for the body, for the internal components of the body, it's going to tend to try to hold on to water. So what I do employ is a carb deplete, carb load strategy. Now that technically, and I've gotten pretty good at prepping people with this and kind of nailing it, but usually involves a 3-day deplete. Starting, let's say, for Saturday show, it's 3-day deplete, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, 2-day load, Wednesday, Thursday. Then Friday is kind of this flexi day where we do, hey, do you need to carb up more? Did you overcarb? Because people, again, respond different. But one of the things that tends to do is when you carb load, the body will tend, because the glycogen pulls water into the muscle. Sure. When you carb deplete, and you also, I do light training around that to fully deplete the muscles as much as possible. The body then will supercompensate glycogen depletion when you carb load, and it will tend to pull the water that is subcutaneous into the muscle. And again, when you're depleting water, you're not allowing that. So again, you can also be shredded and be flat. Whereas when you're doing it properly and you're hydrating properly and then you're carb depleting, assuming you're doing it well, then you're going to look full, and you'll also, you won't have subcutaneous water as much of it.
That's wicked, absolutely wicked. And what about vascularity? If you were to drop some water out, would that affect it?
Again, this is, you will never get a study because it's completely subjective, subjective thing. But in my experience, again, it's very hit and miss. I don't think depleting water is a viable strategy. Or when I say viable, it can be viable, but I don't think it's the best strategy because it's so hit and miss. If you're going to go into a show, you want to give yourself, you don't want to have the potential to, all right, I could do really well, but I could really look like crap. To me, you want to go in and then say, you know what, I have a good confidence that I'm going to look really good. I might not, maybe I could have pushed it a little more, but I know that I'm not going to be, I'm here. Maybe I could have gotten there if I had done something different, but I'm not going to be here. And if you're good enough, if the rest of the things are good enough, you should do really well, if not win your competition.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really nice note to finish it on, actually, isn't it? Because I know that you are extremely busy and I have taken up quite a lot of your time, which I really appreciate. Thank you very much for that. Just on an end note, I know that you obviously gave your end note a little bit earlier on, but have you got anything else that you'd like to leave the conversation on, Brad?
Yeah, well, I kind of will end it on somewhere where I began it by saying that really, to me, science and practice need to come to the middle. We have your practitioners who kind of think of scientists or people doing research as these white lab coat nerds who never been in the gym. And there might be some of those, but certainly that's not me and many of my colleagues who are doing it. And on the opposite end, there are a lot of scientists who kind of thumb their nose at practitioners and think they're just meatheads who don't understand science. And really that the two need to meet in the middle because we need each other. And really, if you want to be your best as a practitioner, you need to embrace science. You need to understand its limitations. And then you need to, and the scientists need to understand that for their research to be meaningful, they need to look to the field, look to the practitioners to research what is going on and what people are finding to be effective.
Lovely. I really like that. So Brad, then very finally, can you just give the audience exactly where they can find you, where they can find your research, and where they can obviously donate to fund the deload research that we were talking about?
Well, yeah, I need to get a GoFundMe page, but I don't have that. But yeah, I have a website. It's called Look Great Naked. Not Look Good Naked. I hear that is a site that you might want to visit. I wouldn't advise it, but Look Great Naked, and I have all sorts of free content. I have a blog that I do post on. I'm trying to post more now too. I'm all over social media. That would probably be the best thing. Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, very active. You can just search for me. You'll find me very easily. And of course, you mentioned I have several books, but the one you mentioned it's called Science and Development of Muscle Hypertrophy, published by Human Kinetics. It's a textbook, but it's a practically based textbook. It has a lot of scientific info in there, but I think from the feedback I've gotten that most practitioners can wade through that, and certainly there's enough practical information there that it should be very valuable.
Definitely, definitely. I'll put all of those links as well on the YouTube comments, guys. So that is it from myself, and don't fear the wait for another week. So have a lovely weekend. Enjoy the sunshine whilst it's here, and please don't moan about the heat because we don't get it that often. And I will speak to you all next week. Brad, thank you again for coming on and giving me your time today. It's been a pleasure as always.
My pleasure, Vicky.